Hi, everyone. This is Sue Erickson, Director of the Library at Virginia Wesleyan University. And right now, I am Hub Director for Open Learning 19, a connectivist MOOC on open learning. And this is part of our week on open professional development. And I'm very pleased to have two guests with me right now. We have Autumm Caines, who is an instructional designer. Hi, Autumm. At the University of Michigan. And Helen DeWaard, who is instructor in the Faculty of Education at Lakehead University, Ontario. Hi, Helen.
Hi.
All right, and they are two of several people who run Virtually Connecting, which is, well, I won't try to explain it. I think we'll explain it as we go. But it's something pretty unique, something I have found pretty exciting to tap into, and it is a great way to do some professional development right from your armchair. So, Autumm, I know you have been involved since the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about how Virtually Connecting, how the idea for Virtually Connecting came about? What is its origin story?
So if I had to say, and I think it's smart of you to kind of hesitate to say you don't want to name what Virtually Connecting is, because we have had a lot of confusion. So some people think it's a technology. When they first hear about it, they think it's a platform or something. Sometimes people have thought that it was like a product that we're selling or something like that. I think at its heart, Virtually Connecting is a network of people, right? And basically the way it got started was the two co-founders, Mehabeli in Cairo, Egypt, and Rebecca Hogue, who was here in the United States, even though she's a Canadian, they were connecting with one another over multiple channels. One of them was the Rhizo 15 Rhizomatic MOOC that was happening. And Meha had applied I should step back for a second. It was more than just applied. She was on the committee to go to the ET4 conference. She had reviewed proposals. She had several different connections. She was supposed to present at the conference. There were a lot of connections. And she was planning to go in person, and just, I think life happened, right? I mean, she's a mother. She's got a lot of things going on. She's a professor. She's a wife. It's really far away. It's really expensive for her, right? And she basically came to the realization that she wasn't going to be able to make it to this conference, and she was lamenting about it. And Rebecca saw this. She saw her, talking to people about this. She was probably even talking to Rebecca about it, saying, man, I really wish I could have gone to this conference. And it's not even so much that I'm going to miss the presentations, because she, I think, had made some arrangements maybe to even present virtually, but she's like, I want the social stuff. I want to be able to talk to people. I want those social connections, and I'm not going to be able to do that. And Rebecca said, well, what if we did Google Hangout? What if we did video calls, and we could make arrangements to meet with some people that you want to meet with in the hallways, right? And we could just fire it up really quickly, and you could have those social connections with folks while I'm at the conference physically, and we'll just make that happen. I believe Whitney Kilgore helped out by providing like a hotspot so that they could do that, because there was some concern about being able to do it over the conference Wi-Fi. And it was a really wonderful story of just like any little bit of blockage that happened, anything that came up that was like a bit of a hurdle, they just overcame it, right? It was like, well, we'll just connect with this person who has this resource, and we'll just kind of make this thing happen. And then after that conference was over, the idea of, hey, why don't we do this with some other people? Maybe if we kept doing this and just connecting with people in general, that would be an interesting thing. And that's when I started to get involved. And a little later, I think maybe Helen got involved. And it just kind of grew from that.
And actually, I remember watching that very first conversation and saying, oh my goodness, what a great idea. and just thinking of the potential of being able to speak to someone from my armchair, who was a keynote at a conference. At first, it was daunting. I was just the kind of the window at the bottom of the hangout, just watching and learning as other people were engaging in these conversations, and eventually stepped up and said, I can help out. There were other conferences that came up, and some opportunities to talk to people that I would never have otherwise had a conversation with. And I was able to ask a question or two in the run of that conversation. So I think it was such an opportunity for me, again, because it's very rare for me to get funding to go to a conference or to be able to attend a conference. So it opened a lot of doors. And I think as Autumm says, it's a group of people who actually do this. It's not an organization. It's not a software. It's just a group of people having conversations and saying, let's talk.
Yeah, it sounds very grassroots, and I think that's one of the things that I love about it. My first experience with virtually connecting was actually part of Open Learning 17. Neha and I were co-directing a week on open access, and as we were planning it, as we got further along in our planning, she said, there's this virtually connecting session that's going to be happening that I think would fit in well. And it was I believe it was Open Ed in Cape Town, South Africa. And so I said, okay, I'll just watch the video recording because it was going to be happening at something like 6 a.m. my time, and I'm not a morning person. And then the night before, I thought, I think I really want to be part of the experience. And that had invited me to do that. So I emailed her and I said, I really think I want to be there. I'm going to get up in the dark and I'm going to do it. And so I did. And I was running the chat while she was leading the conversation, and it was just an amazing experience, as you said, to be with people that I would not normally get to have a conversation with, so it was definitely one of the kind of watershed moments for me in that open learning experience. So great. How do you find the events for virtually connecting to connect with?
It comes from the community, the people who are participating in any way, shape, or form, and they propose a conference venue that they might be attending, or one that they're interested in having a voice in, and seeing if anybody in the community is attending. We do a lot of this conversation in the Slack channels, and once we decide that we want to participate in a particular event, then we set up a channel for that conference event, and anybody who wants to join it joins that channel, and that's where we tend to do all of the nitty-gritty planning pieces. And we then attach a Google Doc, a planning doc, where we start looking at time slots. When are the breaks? When are the main events we don't want to interfere with? So we try and eke out a little bit of time within the conference structure itself. It's run by the people who show an interest in it. So, a DigPed Lab in Toronto, I'd proposed quite a while ago. I knew I was going to go. And then there was just this groundswell about 3 weeks before the event of people who, oh yeah, I want to talk to, and can you, we ended up with 3 sessions that I think had a lot of conversations that didn't necessarily happen in any other space in the DigPed Lab. So it comes from the people in the community.
So if it's one of those where people just have an interest, but they aren't able to attend themselves, how do you find people who will be on site to run that part of it? Is that through the Slack channel as well?
Yeah, primarily through the Slack channel or through direct message in Twitter as well. If some people aren't in Slack channels necessarily all the time or as much as others. So yeah, a lot of back channel conversations through Twitter.
In the beginning, Autumm, you were talking about how it's not a technology, and in fact, it sounds like you use multiple pieces of technology to pull all of this together, which is kind of amazing.
Some of us who have done it for a longer period of time, we kind of keep our ears open, right? And especially when we hear somebody say something like, man, I really wish I was at that conference, right? Like months before the conference is happening, we sort of go, oh, hey, we know some people who are going to be at that conference who want to do virtually connecting from the conference, right? So, I mean, yeah, I think the seed gets planted in multiple ways. I think it can get started because you have somebody who really isn't going to be able to make it and really wants to be there. We do have situations, we have people, sometimes groups of people who are going to conferences and really want to do it because it's a great way to connect when you're at a conference too, right? You get to connect with other people who are there, who are interested in doing it, who are part of the community. I'm thinking about Helen, like the first time I ever met you at the New Media Consortium, right? We'd never met each other face to face, but we were both going to the same conference and we wanted to like meet up with each other. So it makes sense for us to want to do virtually connecting at the conference, right? And then the other thing that does happen from time to time is the conference organizers will actually come to us and say, you know, we see what you're doing. We think it's great. We want it at our conference. Could you come here and could you do it at the conference? So I think it comes from multiple different directions. And then, I mean, sometimes it doesn't fly, right? Because I mean, like all three of those things have to kind of come together for it to happen. So like if I have a bunch of, if we have a bunch of virtual people who really want to connect with a conference, but we don't know anybody who's going to be at the conference, then we have to, of course, you know, kind of give that one up. And the same thing too, like if you have a bunch of people who are going, or even just one person who's going to be at a conference, they really want to do virtually connecting there, but there's really not a lot of virtual interest, again, that's not really going to fly either. So it's a little bit of magic that has to happen for it to actually, everything to coalesce and for it to actually happen, so.
That might be why it feels a little bit like magic when you're in it. At least from my perspective, it has. Autumm, you alluded to this a little bit, that, you know, these are not the keynotes, these are not the sessions. Often those are made available through recordings later anyway, but these are more the networking pieces. I've heard it referred to as the hallway conversations that happen often at conferences, and you talked about that was part of the appeal for Meha, was she was going to be missing those networking opportunities. So can you say a little bit about why you think that's an important opportunity to offer virtually?
I've never seen anybody else do it. Who else is doing it, right?
Yeah.
I take it back. I mean, since Virtually Connecting has started doing it, I've seen some people who maybe run podcasts say, oh, I'm going to do a podcast from the conference. I've seen some conferences, they've actually told us, like, we're basically doing what you're doing, but we want to offer it. It's always a little bit different, right? I mean, we have some things that we're not as interested in. We're not as interested in talking to vendors. We're not interested in being a platform for vendors. For the most part, there are some vendors who are very close to our community that we'll bring on, but they never like pitch their product. They're there for the conversation. They're there for the social piece of it again. So yeah, I think that social piece of it is really important. It's definitely harder. Right? It's a lot easier to just like mic up the keynote speaker and point a camera at them, right? Or to even do that inside of a session and provide a spectoral experience, something that the viewer is meant to, the participant, right? The virtual person, whatever you want to call them, their whole point is for them just to sit back and watch. To really create something where you have you really want to provide an expectation even that the virtual person or the viewer, or whatever you want to call them, right, is going to interact, is going to participate. to make that space welcoming and to bring them in to be able to do that, that is definitely, that's hard, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to do it because there's not a lot of other people doing it. It's difficult to do, and I think it pushes us if we're, and that's part of the reason why I think it's sort of in the ed tech realm, right? If we're going to be talking about working with students learning online, that social learning piece of it is really important, and it really shouldn't be underestimated. It's the best part of any conference, in my opinion, right? And so to think about virtualizing these other parts of the conference and then completely forget about that social piece of it, it seems short-sighted to me.
And I'll just add the opportunities to say within that space. We talk about the hallway conversation, but in my mind, I see it more like a campfire conversation, because we're around the glow of the computer, and the words that Sean Michael Morris did a podcast, and he uses the words through the screen, not to the screen. And I really take that to heart in terms of there are people who really want to be part of this conversation. They want to be able to ask a question, or they want to be able to listen attentively to, for example, we had Jess Mitchell, who speaks from the heart about inclusion and inclusive practices, and asks really tough questions of people, not just those that are in the room with her, that may be kind of part of the conversation on site, but for the people who are there and present with her in that Google Hangout space, it's an opportunity to have your thinking prompted and catalyzed in some way that you wouldn't otherwise. We talk about this as being a PD opportunity. Is that these are the richest conversations I've ever had, that I wouldn't have had even if I had gone to the conference. Because chances are I'm a very quiet introvert. I would never approach Jess Mitchell or anyone else, or Sean Michael Morris or Jesse Stommel and talk to them. But because I've had virtually connecting sessions with them, I could do that at DigPed. So these conversations start with virtually connecting, but they don't end with virtually connecting. And that's the best part, I think, is that these conversations continue beyond the conferences, where other conferences, they don't. They end. It's a hallway conversation and you move on. But these ones kind of resonate. And there are the one that Audrey, that I did virtually connecting. I was the host with Audrey Waters and Jesse Stommel. I go back and watch that one a number of times because it just still resonates. Those words. So, yeah, it's conversations beyond endless. It's not presentation, and it's not a prepared script. So sometimes it's really quite surprising what direction the conversation goes, because it's unanticipated, and some pretty interesting things come out when we start talking.
And I think it's important from the equity perspective, right? So when we create virtual experiences, when we put on a conference, right, we're kind of concentrating knowledge. We're into one space, and then we put a premium on that by having registration fees and then travel costs and all of those kind of things, and that really makes it so that the most privileged people end up in the room, right? And then if we decide to create virtual experiences that are going to extend that out to people who maybe don't have the resources to actually be there. Sometimes people even put a premium on that, right? They'll even charge for that part of it. Mm-hmm. But even whether you put a lower premium on it or whether you offer it for free, or whatever it is that you're going to do to sort of reach that out, if that experience is less than, right? If that experience is purely spectoral, there is an equity problem there, right? You have a problem where the people, again, who are actually physically there are just getting that social experience and the people who are virtual or not. And I do think that it works the other way too. So, just bringing in some of those lesser known voices and giving them a voice in the on-site space to ask some questions and to be heard and to bring up some stuff can be really beneficial the other way around too.
And I think you've done that in terms of some of the people you've chosen to have on site. Can you talk a little bit about how you make those decisions if you're in a situation where you have multiple people to choose from? It sounds like sometimes you might choose a keynote speaker, but other times you might be choosing someone who's lesser known. How do those decisions get made?
Yeah, they definitely get made in conversation as part of the planning process. So Helen kind of talked about how we have this planning document in the Slack channel and some of the logistics around that. And that is something that we are always sort of bringing back to the table, right? Because people do get excited. They get excited to talk to sometimes the bigger names, and it's really easy to just say, oh, let's just get, everybody wants to talk to these people and they're okay with it. So let's just cram everybody into one session, right? And so that is a part of our ethos. It's a part of what we do is stepping back a little bit and saying, okay, who are the lesser known voices? Who are the graduate students? Who are the people of color? Who are the people from other countries? Who are the other perspectives that we want to hear from? And reaching out to some of those folks. That can be tricky too, though, because sometimes those folks, again, if they, that they don't have as much in terms of resources, they might not have the energy or the time because they've expended resources in other ways. But it's a matter of the hospitality piece. So we have a paper that's coming out soon where we're talking about the virtually connecting hospitality piece that we work on a little bit. Helen, would you want to speak to that a little bit more?
Absolutely. The paper is about intentionally equitable hospitality, and it's specifically seeking for with intentionality the voices that we know may be missing in the conversations, that need to be specifically invited because they may not feel like their voices have value. And from my experience, this just speaks volumes around the Creative Commons Global Summits that the last 2 years I attended because it was conveniently in Toronto. And it was a matter of going to people and saying, yes, we really want to hear your voice. And yes, we want to hold a space for others to be able to hear your voice. So we looked specifically for those who were new to the conference, may have been fellows, offered a fellowship through Creative Commons, and gave them an opportunity to share their story, how they got to be involved in open education or Creative Commons or the work that they do in their own locations, and stretched into some African nations that we've never seen before as a result of that, and the Global South into South Africa, or South America, with a couple of people from the Brazil and Colombia areas, which was really exciting to have those voices come in. And it ended up being Regina Gong was helping me do the on-site hosting, and the speaker, the guest that we were talking to, I noticed she was really struggling with English as her first language, and I said, just talking Portuguese was her native language. Just talking your native language, because the person she was talking to also spoke Portuguese, and so did Regina in a small way. So it just evolved into this warm feeling of having this conversation in this virtual space that I don't think would have happened otherwise without that intentional, equitable hospitality that I think we strive for. We don't always hit the mark, but we strive for in the spaces that we create.
It's just, I think, a great example of how we're not a podcast too. So that's the other thing that people get us confused with. They think that we're a piece of media, right? That we're a podcast or that we're a show of some kind. I mean, can you imagine being on a podcast and all of a sudden everybody just goes, well, let's just talk in Portuguese. Like, that's not going to happen. Because you have an audience that you're playing for, right? And like, we record all of the sessions because we do want people to go back. And again, that's the inclusion part of it, right? We realize some people are too shy. Some people can't tune in at that particular time, right? And so like, we record them as a convenience for being, for folks who can't be there, to include people who can't make the time or who are too shy to be on camera or whatever, right? But it's not, the point of recording is not the recording itself. We're not doing a show. But, and that's such a great example of how we're not a show, because like, I can't imagine listening to a show and then all of a sudden the host would be like, well, let's just talk in another language now. Wait, what?
Well, speaking of papers, Autumm, would you like, I know you and Mehab recently published an article about open professional development, which is what this week of Open Learning 19 is all about. Would you like to say a little bit about what you covered in that paper?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe you can include a link to it in the show notes. It's in the International Journal of Educational Technology and Higher Education. And the name of it is, I'm kind of pausing because I'm trying to remember, because all of these things are so long. The name of the journal is really long. The name of the title of the article is really long. It's a call for ownership, agency, and equity in faculty development via connected learning. So the paper is, I really love this paper. It's one of my favorite papers that I've ever written with Meha or with anyone else. And it's a call. So it was part of a special journal series around the future of higher education. And so we decided to instead, a lot of times with the future of kind of themes out there, people get very, we're going to see, and they get very predictive, right? They're going to predict the future. And we decided that we couldn't predict the future. So instead of predicting the future, we were going to make a call for the type of future that we wanted to see. And what we did was we took several types of connected learning examples that are out there in the web, different networks, different communities that we're a part of, and we called those out and we described them. So there's several examples in there. We also did a semi-fictional autoethnography as a part of the paper. So we actually have like a little fictional narrative of kind of like a week in the life of Autumm and Meha, where we talk about how we weave like a virtually connecting session into some faculty development that we're working on, and how we, are talking to each other about some other projects that we're working on. And so, yeah, I think that paper is a wonderful view of how we, work with virtually connecting in our lives, and how it's a part of something that we do, a big part of our lives, but also of the professional development that we have for each other, that we have for ourselves, but also with each other.
And part of the professional development that you can do with this article is to hypothesize. So you can use hypothesis to do the annotations, because that's been going on since the article came out.
There is an ongoing hypothesis layer on the article. Some folks from the Pedagogy Network, they're a network of instructional designers, put together a annotation, like a flash annotation around it. And it has been ongoing. People continue to add to it. So feel free to jump on in and take a look at that. I think it'll give you a great glimpse at how these different networks work with one another, but also give you some examples of some professional development, open professional development opportunities that are out there.
I think the other thing for me that the article does is it grounds it in adult learning theory. Right, so there are a couple different theories that you pull in there, which help explain why these things work for us as adult learners. So that was really enlightening as well. So it's almost got three parts. the theory, the sampling, and then the case study, or what did you call it, Autumm? It's an autoethnography, right?
It's a semi-fictional autoethnography. We didn't have, like, really kind of have the time or the space to do a real autoethnography. We really kind of like watch our practice, but we've been doing this long enough. We just kind of winged it, right? So it's semi-fictional, but it's very true to, a real week kind of in our lives.
Well, this has been wonderful, a wonderful conversation. Is there anything either of you would like to add before we wrap up?
The one piece that I always consider when I'm doing any of the virtually connecting is honoring the choice people make to come into digital spaces and know that there's a risk involved in doing so. And I consciously make that decision to risk having my face on the screen, but that some people don't come to that with as much comfort, maybe, or with as much, as one might say, with the privilege that we take. And some people need our understanding, need our support, need our encouragement, need our sometimes just gentle nudges and pushes to do what I think we do, obviously, in open educational spaces. So I think just honoring the person behind it needs to be considered.
My final thought is just a big thank you to the open collaborators and connectivists, those who are putting together the connectivist MOOCs and the open learning opportunities out there. They are, the cornerstone of my professional development. And I wouldn't be, the educator, instructional designer, blogger, whatever, right, that I am without that. And as Helen said, right, remembering that not everybody is there yet. Not everybody has made that choice to do that. And some people, it's just not safe for them to make that choice to be in that space, and that it's not a space for everyone. I think at its heart, at its nature, it is as open as it is, right? Like there's always going to be those folks who aren't going to be able to partake in it, and that we have to remember that. In those spaces, because they are spaces of privilege, and we need to remember that that we're not the only ones who have say in those larger conversations. So,
and a big shout out to the virtually connecting community for doing what they do.
Thank you all for doing what you do and keeping us all connected in ways that I certainly never thought possible a few years ago. And it's been wonderful to connect with you both today and make this a special part of Open Learning 19. So thank you, Helen, DeWaard, and Autumm Caines for being with us today and talking about virtually connecting.